Hi, this is Mardi once again and welcome to my channel. Timeline of the Philippine History. 1965. Ferdinand E. Marcos is elected by a big majority as president. The Philippine presidential and vice presidential elections of 1965 were held on November 9, 1965. Incumbent President Diosdado Macapagal lost his opportunity to get a second full term as President of the Philippines to Senate President Ferdinand Marcos. His running mate, Senator Gerardo Rojas, lost to former Vice President Fernando Lopez. Emmanuel Pelaez did not run for Vice President. An unprecedented 12 candidates ran for President. However, 9 of those were Noysan's candidates. This was the first election where all of the major presidential candidates were born after the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. (1972) Martial law was declared by President Marcos. This period is marked with human rights abuses and corruption. At 7:17 p.m. on September 21, 1972, President Ferdinand Marcos announced that he had placed the entirety of the Philippines under martial law. This marked the beginning of a 14th period of one-man rule which would effectively last until Marcos was exiled from the country on February 24, 1986. This 14-year period in the Philippine history is remembered for the administration's record of human rights abuses, particularly targeting political opponents, students activists, journalists, religious workers and farmers, and others who fought against the Marcos dictatorship. Based on the documentation of Amnesty International Task Force detainees of the Philippines and similar human rights monitoring entities, historians believe that the Marcos dictatorship was marked by 3,257 known extrajudicial killings, 35,000 documented tortures, 77 disappeared, and 70,000 incarcerations. (1981) Marcos lifts martial law. On January 17, 1981, President Ferdinand E. Marcos lifted martial law which he declared nationwide on September 21, 1972 through Proclamation No. 1081, citing the rising wave of lawlessness and the threat of a communist insurgency as justification. Marcos issued the proclamation which curtailed press freedom and other civil liberties, closed down Congress and media establishments, and caused the arrest of opposition leaders and militant activists, including staunchest critics then Senators Benigno Aquino Jr., Jovito Salonga, and Jose Diokno. Many other political opponents were forced to go in exile overseas. By virtue of Proclamation No. 245, Marcos lifted the state of martial law to show the Filipino people and the world that the situation in the Philippines was back to normal and that the 1973 Constitution and the government were working smoothly. (1983) Opposition leader Benigno Ninoy Aquino returns from exile and is assassinated on arrival at Manila International Airport. Aquino's widow, Corazon, leads the People Power protest movement. As the situation in the Philippines worsened, Aquino decided to return to face Marcos and restore democracy in the country, despite numerous threats against it. He was assassinated at the Manila International Airport on August 21, 1983, upon returning from his self-imposed exile. His death revitalized opposition to Marcos. It also catapulted his widow, Corazon, into the political limelight and prompted her to successfully run for a 6-year term as president as a member of the United Nationalist Democratic Organization Party in the 1986 snap election. 1986. Marcos was officially declared winner in a presidential election, beating Corazon Aquino amid charges of fraud. Demonstrations erupt. Marcos flees to Hawaii. Aquino is declared president and forms a new government. The Philippine presidential and vice presidential elections of 1986 were held on February 7, 1986. Popularly known as the 1986 snap election, it is among the landmark events that led up to the People Power Revolution, the downfall of Ferdinand E. Marcos' martial law regime, and the accession of Corazon Aquino as president. The final results of the February 7, 1986 snap election led to the popular beliefs that the polls were tampered and considered an electoral fraud. On 9 February, 35 computer programmers walked out of the COMELEC's electronic recount at the Philippine International Convention Center, some fearing for their safety and seeking sanctuary in Baclaran Church. The technicians, whose protest was broadcast live on national television, claimed that the Marcos camp had manipulated the election results. Enrile and Ramos then secluded themselves in the military and police headquarters of Camp Aguinaldo and Camp Crame, respectively, leading the People Power Revolution from 22 to 25th of February 1986, which toppled the Marcos regime. 1992. Endorsed by Aquino, her Secretary of Defense General Fidel Ramos wins presidential election. U.S.-Philippine Congress rejects a new treaty with the U.S., and Subic Bay Naval Base and Clark Airfield returns to Philippine government, ending American military presence in the Philippines. For the first time, the Philippines had a presidential election under the multi-party system, as opposed to the two-party system which had been placed since 1935. 7 candidates contested the first presidential election following the restoration of democracy in 1986. President Corazon Aquino had chosen Defense Secretary Fidel V. Ramos of the newly minted Lakas ng Tao Party as her successor. Ramos won the election with the smallest plurality in Philippine electoral history, with only 23% of the vote. On September 16, 1991, 12 senators made history when they made the controversial decision to end years of foreign military presence in the Philippines. On December 21, 1992, the military bases agreement signed in 1947 was terminated, with the last of the U.S. bases turned over to the Philippine government and transformed into economic zones. 1996. The government of Ramos agrees to greater autonomy for southern island of Mindanao. Moro National Liberation Front ends the guerrilla war with the government. The 1996 peace agreement between the government of the Republic of the Philippines and the Moro National Liberation Front officially ended the 24-year-old struggle waged by the MNLF for independence and later for autonomy. The agreement contains 2 major sections. Opposition to the agreement remains strong, particularly from within the Bansang Moro community, as symbolized by the continuing militant struggle by the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. 1997. Asian financial crisis grips Asia, and the Philippines escaped the crisis despite series of currency devaluations. The Asian financial crisis was a period of financial crisis that gripped much of East Asia and Southeast Asia beginning in July 1997 and raised fears of a worldwide economic meltdown due to financial contagion. The crisis started in Thailand on July 2 with the financial collapse of the Thai baht after the Thai government was forced to float the baht due to lack of foreign currency to support its currency peg to the US dollar. As the crisis spread, most of Southeast Asia and Japan saw slumping currencies, devalued stock markets, and other asset prices, and a precipitous rise in private debt. Indonesia, South Korea, and Thailand were the countries most affected by the crisis. Hong Kong, Laos, Malaysia, and Philippines were also hurt by the slump. Brunei, mainland China, Singapore, Taiwan, and Vietnam were less affected, although all suffered from a loss of demand and confidence throughout the region. Japan was also affected, though less significantly. 1998. Former movie actor Joseph Estrada is elected president. Joseph Erupt Estrada was elected president of the Philippines in 1998 and served for 31 months until he was ousted after the People Power II protest in January of 2001. A former college dropout, movie actor, and vice president, he was known for his short and stocky physique, greasy Elvis Presley pompadour, and thin mustache. He was notorious for his womanizing, hard drinking, gambling, and less than perfect English. His nickname Erupt is a Tagalog word for body spelled backwards. Estrada was well known as an actor in the Philippines before he entered politics. He called the presidency the greatest rule of my life. Even so, he sometimes acted if politics was all a big joke. Once he said, "Why do we pass all these laws when nobody seems to follow them?" His trademark was a white wristband. 2000. On charges of corruption, the lower house impeached Estrada. Philippine President Joseph Estrada moved a step closer to being ousted from office when the House of Representatives approved an impeachment trial to address the corruption charges against him. In a rowdy session punctuated by chants urging the president to resign and the signing of a popular nationalist song, House Speaker Manuel Villar immediately endorsed the sending of impeachment charges to the Senate shortly after leading the 218-member legislature in a prayer. 2001. Estrada was forced to step down due to public outrage over corruption allegations. Vice President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo assumes the presidency. The trial of Philippine President Joseph Estrada took place between 2001 and 2007 at the Sandigan Bayan. Estrada, popularly called Erap, was ousted from office in 2001 during a popular uprising in Metro Manila after an aborted impeachment trial in which he was charged with plunder and perjury. Soon after his ouster, the same charges were filed against him at the Sandigan Bayan. Angry protesters drove Estrada from the presidential residence on January 20, 2001, and Arroyo assumed power. Arroyo brought an unprecedented academic and administrative background to the Philippine presidency, but her tenure was plagued by political unrest. Just months after she took office, some 20,000 supporters of Estrada stormed the gates of the presidential palace. Several people were killed and Arroyo declared a state of rebellion that lasted 5 days. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.